Hi everyone, it's Lauren. I hope you're all doing really well. Today we're going to be talking about the books that I read in the first half of March. And I read a lot of books for me for the first half of March. I'm really pleased. I always try and do mid-month wrap-ups, but then it gets to the point and I actually haven't read very many books. I maybe read one or two, so there's no point doing the whole video about them, but I've read 5 in these first couple of weeks. So I'm really excited to talk to you about them. As always, all of these books are going to be linked in the description box below if you would like to check them out for yourself. So the first book I have here is the pick for my Patreon book club, and that was A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. So I run a book club over on Patreon where we read one book every quarter. So now that we are getting towards the end of March, we're going to be choosing our books for the next round. So I'll leave a link to my Patreon in the description box below if you're interested in joining the book club. I'm going to be uploading a review of this book to Patreon next week, so I won't say too much about it now, but I was very frustrated about this book. This is a fantasy-esque, historical fiction-esque work, and it is very much like a Victorian lady, gentle lady, who's off going around the world studying dragons. She's like a natural historian, but it's not actually set in our world. It's set in a completely fantasy land, but it's very similar to Victorian Europe, but they all have kind of different cultures. And basically the first half of this book I was completely in love with it. The second half of this book I hated it. So I have many thoughts to share with the members of my book group. So again, if you are interested in joining, the link is in the description box below. But yeah, very mixed feelings about this one. The next book I have here is My Year of Meat by Ruth Ozeki. This is my first ever Ruth Ozeki. I've heard a lot about her and I wanted to try and read her books in order. I don't know why, but that's just how I felt, because she has 3 books and they feel semi-autobiographical from what I've heard, so I wanted to kind of see the progression. And this was just astounding. I don't know what I expected from this book, but I really enjoyed it. This is about a woman, Jane, who is a Japanese American working on a TV series for a Japanese network which is sponsored by an American meat company. So the TV show that she's producing is all about meat. She goes to a different part of America every week, meets a different wife. It's called My American Wife, and they try and export wholesome American values and wholesome American beef to Japanese housewives and try and encourage them to eat more meat. And juxtaposed with Jane's story, we also have the wife of the, I don't know if he's the TV exec, I think he works for the sponsor who's sponsoring this program, and she is suffering from bulimia, her periods have stopped, and her husband is very keen for them to start having a family. So it's a really interesting look at the mix between meat and nourishment and women's bodies. And there were some themes in here that I completely wasn't expecting, because they're looking at hormones being pumped into cows, for example, and how that gets into the food chain. So there's a real link between the meat that's being eaten and the idea of conception, of like fertility, of miscarriages, of birth defects, and there's a lot of that going on between all the various characters. And yeah, I found that quite hard to read at the moment, but at the same time, like coming out the other side of the book, I was just very amazed. I wasn't sure what this book was going to be about, but it has very much put me off eating meat, at least in the short term, and I'm really excited to read some more of her work now. Next I read a complete disaster of a book, which was Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey, and I borrowed this from Jean because I just wanted something light and quick, which it completely was, and I was really in the mood for sort of an easy breezy romance. And this was that at first. I think halfway through the book I was really enjoying it, and then it just got so stupid. I don't think of myself as a particularly literary snob, so I didn't mind the writing in this book, and you know, it has been written very quickly. I'm sure she's just churned it out. It's quite full of cliches, it reads so breezily, but that was fine, and I was really enjoying that at first. That was what I wanted from this book, but the actual plot and the pacing just made no sense. I'm going to really struggle to explain this to you now, but it's a woman who is the youngest of 3 children, and then this older guy who was, I think, her older brother's friend, comes home, and he was a professional baseball player, but then he got an injury, so he can't play baseball anymore, so he's back in their hometown. So she convinces him to get a job at her family's construction firm, but also then they decide they have to fake a relationship. It's that there's so many different strands of plot, and then also she and her sister and some other women are trying to they create a club for women to try and better themselves, and that's like fixing themselves up at the same time, and it just keeps going all the way up until about 3/4 of the way through. New plots keep appearing, and I just didn't know what was supposed to be happening. And at the end as well, I think it's very clear that they're going to end up together and there's no problem, but then in the last maybe 20 pages, about 5 new strands of plot and all these epic misunderstandings happen, and I was just like, it's fine. We didn't need all this plot. Like, just boy meets girl, that would have been fine. And I've got to say, I really didn't enjoy the sex in the book either. I don't mind sex in general, nothing wrong with that. But I didn't like that they were building this kind of emotional connection, and it was very much about both of them not wanting to be hurt and them building a trust and a love between them. And then the sex just felt so dirty, but in a real kind of nasty way from my perspective. Like, he was very domineering and she was loving it, and in the book it was saying things like, oh, as he was thrusting in her mouth, she never felt more like a woman, and I was just like, I don't like this is really I'm finding it a bit creepy, because then they'd immediately go back to like a children's birthday party and you'd be like, oh, okay, I'm not sure about the pairing of these two moods. So it did its job. I read it in about a day, but I really wouldn't recommend it. The next 2 books, though, luckily were 5-star reads, so get ready for these. The first one is Inside This Place, Not of It, which is narratives, testimonies from women who either are currently or were currently in the US prison system or have been imprisoned. And this book is the March-April read for the Feminist Orchestra Book Club as well, so I'll leave a link to that book group on Goodreads if you would like to join. This is run by me and Jean, and we talk about different feminist books throughout the year. And we read them over 2 months as well, so you've got a bit of time to catch up if you haven't been involved before. And this was just astounding. I was trying to read it quite slowly because the narratives from these women are very hard-hitting, very difficult to read, and it's hard to read about so much abuse, so much pain, and so much almost not being able to get out of the cycle of that. And to read about that again and again and again with different women can be very heavy going. So I did have to read a woman and then maybe have a break and then go back and read a different woman, but it just was phenomenal, and it made me so angry. Like, when you see the broken homes that some of these women come from, and when you see how difficult it is once you're in that situation to get out of it. But apart from the route that took them on the path to committing crime, it's about how dreadful the US justice system is. And I'm sure here as well, I don't want to kind of act like the UK is amazing and America's crazy, but for some of these women, like, just being an accessory to a crime, not being really part of it. There was one woman who was driving a car where she thought a drug deal was going on and she was going to pick up her boyfriend or something when she was really young, and that drug deal turned violent and turned into murder, and she didn't even know that had happened, and then she gets 20 years to life or something. It's so extreme, the punishment that is inflicted on these people. And then once they get into prison, just the abuse of power from the guards. Oh, it makes me feel sick. And it's so frustrating to read as well, because the people that they want to complain against are the people that have power over them, and they just don't feel like they have a voice. Like, so many times in these narratives, you would find women who'd been abused by medicals in the prison or by a guard, and then when they complain about that guard, nothing really happens to them. They just get moved to another prison, but they suffer so much retaliation from the rest of the guards. And it's just like this cycle, this catch-22. It would almost be like some kind of absurdist comedy if it weren't so horrific, that they just can't get out of this cycle no matter what they do. And yeah, I was literally texting Jean afterwards saying, I basically want to work in a women's prison now. I'm going to change my career because it affected me so much. So it's a very difficult read, but I would so highly recommend this to everyone if you're interested at all. And finally, for the first part of March, I finished Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, and this obviously won the Booker Prize last year, and it is amazing. Like, this really lived up to the hype for me. I loved every second of reading it, and I really, really love a book when the characters are so well thought out, so real and fleshed out. I love a book which is very clever, like in a literary sense, and also in terms of the plot, in terms of all these characters' lives linking together, but is also very, very readable. I'm really down for a book like this winning such a literary prize because I feel like it's so accessible for everybody. This book is split into a series of chapters which focuses on different women. It's 12 main women, mostly they're black. You do hear from some men as well, like but it's mostly black women is the focus of this book, and all of them are a lot more connected than you initially realise. But it's just about them, about their experiences in various parts of the UK, about their histories, about their cultures. A lot of it is about the relationship between mothers and daughters and family history, but it touches upon so many different people, so many different experiences and perspectives and different ways of dealing with what it's like to be a black person in the UK, and like to have being coded as different, coded as foreign. And it just weaves a really beautiful tapestry of all of these different people's lives, which are so intertwined and yet so singular at the same time. It's quite a difficult book to describe because there's not an overall plot as such that I could tell you without just telling you everything that's in the book, but it's just brilliant to read, and I think you should believe the hype, basically. That's all I can say. Everyone has loved this book, and I don't think I can add too much more to the conversation other than I also loved it and would highly, highly recommend it. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books. I'd also love to hear from you on what you've been reading in March, what you're looking forward to reading. Are you going to read anything from the Women's Prize long list? That's always like the big thing that I wait for in spring. Obviously, Girl, Woman, Other is on it. Queenie was another of my absolute loves last year, which is on it. And the rest of them, I'm going to try and work my way through. But is there anything particular that you're looking forward to reading? I'd love to hear about that. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye.